Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this episode of the Believers Early Crits podcast. This is your brother Rahul Ali, the Early Talent Man. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing a important topic with Dilwoar Hussain. Dilwar is, I can't really do any justice to his level of experience that he's had in terms of he's worked in a startup, like from just being like a software developer to being the chief technology officer. He's worked in government digital service as a senior developer. He's worked on like quite a few interesting projects, like for example, Share Iftar, which is an online platform to share iftar meals that he did a few years back. He's also founded Wed Plans, which is a way to kind of bring wedding planning online, making the planning, I guess, easy. And now he's working on a project called Track Progress, which is, I think, perhaps relevant to this podcast because one of the challenges that many people face, one of the things that people come across when you're writing up your examples. I mean, have you ever written up a competency example or written up, okay, I'm going to do my application, and it says demonstrate a time where you worked in the team, demonstrate a time where you've done this, and you're typing it up and you're like, hang on a minute, I've not done nothing. But reality is you probably have done something, but what you haven't done is you haven't tracked it. And this is a platform that he's working on that we'll be able to access and be able to track our own progress, because the greatest lie you can tell yourself is that I'm going to remember, which in most cases none of us ever do. So this episode we talk about track progress, we talk about Dilwar's career. I think it's really interesting. We initially were meant to just talk about track progress only, but we kind of went into a whole conversation about his career journey and how that's gone and what he's learned and the advice he's given. And I think there's lots of valuable, insightful gems and advice you can get from there. So that's why I've left it as it is. I've not cut out all the other stuff. I've left it as the real conversation that we had, the whole conversation that we had, for you to hopefully enjoy and take a lot from. It's a very valuable one. And of course, as always, please do share, subscribe, and like. Jazakallah khair. Okay, before I forget to mention, this is an audio-only episode because, the irony of speaking to a software developer on this episode is that the software failed. So there was a lot of audio and video lag, so we've just thought it'd be easier just for it to be released as an audio episode. We have captured some snippets in video, and also because I'm going to be looking at trying a different video software, so hopefully I'll make the video podcast recording a lot easier. But anyway, if you want, you can listen to this on a podcast app, or you can carry on listening on this. So just wanted to let you know that. Welcome, Dilwar, to the Believers Early Crits podcast. I didn't expect you to be the first person on GDS that I've met to have you on the podcast, to be fair, but it's good to have you on, man.
Yeah, that's good, man. Thanks.
So we're going to discuss an important topic today, actually, and I think it's one of the things. And when you came to me to kind of suggest, is this something that you would be interested in for the podcast? I thought definitely yes, because one of the issues or challenges that people come across throughout the career, and even at the very beginning of their career, is their ability to track their progress, their ability to kind of capture examples of things they've done, the skills they've gained. And I recall many times when I was like applying for jobs at the beginning, and this is when I had like little to no experience, and I just think, what have I done anything basically to like, do I have any skills? Do I have any value? Have I got anything like meaningful to put in this application? And in most cases, what happens is you end up exaggerating a lot of what's been said, and then it kind of makes you feel like you're not actually real. You're kind of like faking it as well. So it kind of gives you that a bit of that imposter syndrome, which I think we'll discuss as well. But the reality is, I think within anything that people do, whether it's voluntary experiences or even on their job, there probably is so much that they've got in terms of skills or like experience acquired. It's just that they don't capture it. So when it comes to actually applying it, they don't know how to do it. And I know we're going to definitely discuss that, because I think people especially people listen to this, if they, in their career or early on in their career, have not started their career, it's a strong like habit. Or if you do this, you're basically positioning yourself to be in a very strong position throughout your career, which is why I think this is like very, very, very important. But I know you as Dilwar, the GDS developer, because I know we met there at the Muslim GDS community, which you started up. One thing I never actually asked you was like, how did it all begin? Because I know, actually I don't know. I kind of met your GDS. I know you were Gov at UK, and I believe you were like a senior developer, right?
Yeah, senior developer on Gov.
At least I got that right. But tell me how, like, if we're going back a bit of history about Dilwar, let's say back to like college or university, how did it begin, and how did you get to where you are now, and beginning this sort of project as well?
Yeah. So I think my love for computers started when I was like 10, 11, when we got our first computer. And back then, computers were very expensive, and my dad got one for us. And I think it took us a couple of months, and I did something silly and I broke it. So I think I erased the Windows 2000 or something that was on there. And I was like, what did I do? I messed up, and I didn't really want to tell my dad, so I tried to fix it myself. I managed to get the OS back on, but I think the guy who sold us the computer, he didn't put the key on. Like usually you have like a sticker on the side of the computer with the serial number, and back then every software had a key that you needed to type, and internet wasn't really like a thing back then either, so it wasn't very common. Some people had dial-up, and some people had broadband.
AOL, welcome to AOL.
Yeah, but we didn't have any of that, because like it would cut the phone line, which was quite important back then. Like not everyone had a mobile phone, so the most form of communication was through a phone line, right? And especially like in an Asian household, like everyone's always talking on the phone. So we didn't have internet back then, so I had to just figure out how to get it back on, but I got stuck. So I think even back then, like when I was 10, 12 years old, it was like a thing that I was into. And as years went by, I started doing more stuff. We eventually got my dad. I told my dad, and he replaced it. And whatnot.
Was he happy?
I don't think, because computers were so new. Like it was the first computer we got. I think he wasn't like really unhappy, but it was more like, okay, we need to spend a little bit more money now to fix this thing. So, we eventually fixed it. Then I started getting into like thinking about like web development. So I started doing web development before I even knew what web development was. I was like, I just need a website thing. So, on the internet, and I was like, I don't know any HTML or anything like that. So I saw some tutorial on some site where they basically built a website on Photoshop. Then using scraping tools and stuff, you made like hotspots. So I think one of my first website was made up of probably images everywhere and just hotspots where you click on it and you can go to one page to another, and like so it was really crazy. Then I think I didn't really think about like software engineering as a career. I was like, oh, it's just a hobby. So I was doing other things like video editing, sound editing, whatever.
If you want to do the podcast editing, you're always welcome.
Yeah, it's a long time ago now. I need to brush up my skills. But yeah, so I started doing a lot of this stuff, and for me, it was like a hobby kind of thing. I remember like it wasn't something that I took very seriously, but I loved doing it. I love getting software. I love, like, back then there was a lot of software buying software wasn't really a thing, so people were always on like LimeWire and whatnot. And
Not
I
me,
never,
not me.
I never realized how bad, like, how much it affects companies by doing that. I think, um, like as I grew up, like I was like, nah, I'm just gonna pay for everything now. And I think they made it easier now to pay. Before, like Photoshop was like £1,000 or £700, and like, who can afford £700 to buy Photoshop, but still wants to do the Photoshop stuff, right?
Yeah, that's like the first edition of it, where you can't really do much anyway.
It's ridiculous. CS3 or something like that. I can't remember what
Yeah.
it was. Yeah, it was it was ridiculously expensive, and like I think they made it easier now. It's like £7 something a month. But I think Adobe had a monopoly back then, so they didn't really care about how much they were charging. And like, hopefully, no one comes and like raids my house. But but like, um, software was one of the things that it was so common that everyone would just pirate software, and it was ridiculous. And when you're a kid, you don't understand the legal side of things. You just understand, oh, I need this thing, and this guy on the internet is telling me use this patch. Download the trial and use this patch. And I think that's when I started understanding, like, okay, you could rewrite software, you can go into the code and edit the code so that the code thinks that it's still on trial forever. So those kind of things. So I started learning to code because I had a need, and my need was I wanted to use the software, but I didn't have, um, what's it called, £1,000 at 15 years old, and I couldn't justify buying. I remember we bought one piece of software, and we a couple of guys at school, we all paid a portion of it. So we bought that software, and the license was for one person. We all paid for it, and like, the security was very lax back then as well. Like, they wouldn't really check. And I remember one software, the hack was, you just changed the time on your desktop, and it thinks that's still on trial. Maybe we should delete all of this on the podcast. But this is where I started like thinking about software, and I'm thinking, like, if we can like rewrite software by just tricking it to think like this, then like, it's not, it's just a logic thing, right? It hasn't got any super magic stuff going on
Yeah,
underneath.
yeah.
So I started getting into it, then I started learning how to code, and yeah, it was something that it was just interesting for me, and it was like a hobby. Then when it came to choosing my A level, I was like, okay, what do I want to do in a career? And everyone's like, oh, doctor, engineer, thing,
It's the way, bro.
lawyer.
This is the way.
Yeah, and I'm like, "Oh, I don't really enjoy like reading and stuff like that much. Like, I enjoy reading and learning. Um, I don't enjoy reading case law and just learning about what happened in the case. Like, and you have to remember every single case law. So I did law in A level, and I did history, and I did maths. And I think maths is the only one that I probably use these days. Maybe a bit of history because you're analyzing stuff all the time. But yeah, law. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed like the whole arguing, debating, like understanding the law bit. But I didn't really enjoy the whole like memorizing case law and precedents and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I like that you said that about the arguing part. I can't ever imagine arguing with you, or like
What would you
you
argue?
know, come across the guy like that who's like, like sometimes you get people that are very like
Oh,
debating, argumenting. Like you're
yeah,
very easy to get along with that guy.
yeah. For me, it's not about maybe arguing is the wrong
So more
word to use.
debating and kind of getting your point across.
Yeah, more like articulating what you're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
say.
yeah.
And I think that's a skill that I learned by mistake by going into law. Because with law, you have to, every single point you make, you have to put a evidence across to prove that point. So, for example, if you're trying to prove something, then you say this case law or this precedence shows XYZ. And that's kind of what you need to do when you're in your career as well. You're
I
always
see the
trying to
connection.
like you, let's say you're trying to prove that your method is better than someone else's method. You need to always show evidence that your method has more merit than the other method, and the other method isn't is maybe at face value looks like a more attractive method, but these are the reasons why it's not as good.
Yeah,
So
I'm seeing a theme here. I'm seeing a theme because even like from the very beginning where you mentioned about the computer, where you sort of messed it up, but then you were kind of fixing it. I mean, when you're looking at developing and coding and stuff like that, it's a lot of tinkering, isn't it? It's a lot of like
yeah,
problem solving,
so
trial and error, a lot of that. And I remember when I poured water over my brother's PS1 when I was 5. There was no way to fix that. I couldn't undo that mistake, and he still remembers it to this day, like 20 years later. And yeah, but and then when you mentioned like the software stuff, like I remember PSP ISO downloading those games. Wait, this is not a confession, by the way.
uh,
The chipped consoles, that kind of stuff. It's very interesting how you've seen that stuff, and then you come up start doing stuff like law, where you're not articulating points of evidence, which I guess is a big thing when you're trying to like
yeah,
present whether it's a software, whether it's a product, or any kind of thing you're doing at work or life. We've
yeah,
got evidence to
exactly.
back up. It adds substance to it. But yeah, carry on, man.
Yeah, no, like everything that you're doing, like everyone's like, oh, what's your user need? What's the user need? Anytime you go anywhere and you're like, okay, I had this idea or I had this hypothesis that if we do this thing, then be like, oh, where's the research that backs it up? And everyone in there, like, I think 10 years ago, you could come up with that idea and just build it. And everyone, if it was shiny enough, everyone would back you. But now it's like, is it shiny? Plus, has it got a proper research behind it? Because it might not meet the user need. And I think that, like, I faced that when I'm building track progress, I faced that a lot. Like, what's the user need? What's the user need? And I know what the user need is because I've been through it and I understand where people are struggling.
Yeah.
But I still needed to go through, like, I did a massive research in GDS to go through all of that. Anyways, back to my
Yes.
life.
So you went, yes, at college, did
So,
history,
yeah, I
law,
did
maths.
history, law, maths. Then I went to university. I did computer science. I think after like my first ever tutorial, I managed to get a client that wanted a website for a thing. So I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just gonna do it. So every single lesson I was learning in the thing, I would go and improve their site. And they got exactly what they needed. I think they paid me like £150. Like it was like some medical recruitment company. I think one of my uncles was working. He started it up and he wanted a website. Like, do what you're doing, computer science.
Was that during your degree, or was that after it?
Not like probably like the first week of my degree. So
Wow.
I,
Fucking
I think we
experience
had,
straight away, man.
yeah, it was just like crazy. Like he came up to me, I was like, I don't know how to build a website. And I told him I don't really know how to do it properly. Like if you want a proper website, I don't know how to do it. He's like, just do it. Like we can see how it goes. I'm like, okay, if I do it and it's not good enough, then you can just have it for free and go somewhere else. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's just do it. So I just did it, and he was over the moon. He was like, this is great. Does exactly what I need it to do. I was like, okay, it's not my best work, but like, because I set my expectations so high,
Yeah.
what the skills I already had was already good enough for what he wanted. But for me, it was like, I need to deliver the best thing possible. I wasn't happy with it because of my personal expectations, but for the client, they were like over the moon because they got a website for £150. Like even back then, like your website was like probably at least £500 to £1,000. Like if you're paying someone abroad.
Yeah. I feel like
Um,
you, just by doing that, you probably gained some, well, real
yeah,
life proper experience that you could apply. And then
yeah,
Would you say at the same time as well, like when you started your kind of like, the computer science degree and the sort of software career, were you sort of like before the kind of craze about software development came? Were you like kind of before that curve? Because it feels like you were there before it became very mainstream, or like where a lot more people start thinking about it as a proper option. It was before when you were there, it felt like it wasn't as popular.
Yeah, like it wasn't really as popular. Like I think it's only the last 7, 8 years probably that is probably like really gone mainstream. Now I see people telling their kids to become software engineers, and I'm like,
Added to the A-list careers.
I'm like back then when I was doing it, people were like, "Oh, what are you doing that for? What are you gonna do?" And I know, like, no offense to my friends who are doing law and he done law and stuff, but I know lawyers who are like haven't been able to penetrate their market because there's so much competition. And I'm coming along here fiddling with my computer and like getting better paid salary than they did. And I think like I think I just got there by luck, or the will of Allah. Like, um, it's it was I just chose to do something I was passionate about
Yeah.
rather than think. And I'm I think one of the things I do, I make decisions very. I just make a decision and that's it. I just stick to it. Like when I have a feeling, I just use my intuition or whatever. And when I feel like something's right, I'll just do it, regardless of what everyone is saying. And sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it doesn't work out. And like even the times that it doesn't work out, I learn so much from that lesson.
Yeah.
And I think for me, every single thing is a learning curve. Yeah, so I did my degree. Then I remember the last year of my degree, I haven't even finished my dissertation. I think it was like January time. Um, and some recruiter, I think by mistake, I had my profile up on LinkedIn. He messaged me and he's like, "Oh, I need these skills with X amount of experience and blah blah blah." And I'm like, "I haven't even got any experience. Like, I can't give you that." So me being me, I was like, "Okay, there's a way to break this system." So I emailed him back. I'm like, "I could do all of those things that he listed and more, but I don't have any experience. Here's my CV. Can you speak to the company and see what they say?" Um, and he comes back to me like a couple hours later, he's like, "Oh, they want to interview you." I'm like, "Okay." So then they're like, "Oh, they're in Cambridge." I'm like, "What? I'm in London." Like, they're in Cambridge. I'm like, "Okay, I'll just go for the interview for the experience." Then
Good thinking.
I went into the interview. I was like, "No way am I gonna get this job." So no way am I gonna let. Sorry. Before that, they gave me a test, and I did the test, and the test all worked. So I sent them back. They gave me an interview. So when I went in there, I was like, "No way I'm gonna get this job. Like, it's a good job. Plus, it's in Cambridge, so I don't really care about it." So I was like, "I'm not gonna go let them interview me. So I'm gonna go interview them." So I went in there, like maybe a little bit too arrogant. But I went in there, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna be confident." So the CTO came in, and he started talking to me. They're like, "Oh, do you want a drink?" And usually I'm like, "No." So I'm like, I've driven all this way here. I'm like, "Can I get a Coke?" So he had to go find a vending machine and give me. I know. I remember he's looking at his face. I know he wasn't really happy about that.
Never water, bro. Coke, yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, I'm in a place where they can get Coke, so I'm gonna ask for Coke." Um, so they got me a can of Coke. We had a chat. I was like, "Okay, so what do you think about my test?" And they're like, "Yeah, it was good. It works." I'm like, "So what do you guys do?" Start interviewing them, grilling them, like not grilling them, but like also you sell. They basically sell software to government, and it was yeah. So I went for the interview, um, did the whole thing with them, and then I was expecting a no. I was like, on the way home, I was like, to my dad, probably a no. Like, they didn't really ask me that many questions. They just they just answered my questions, and but they were quite engaging. I think I had a really good. Uh, I enjoyed myself in that interview because it wasn't like they were grilling me. I wasn't nervous. I didn't really care, and I think I came across maybe confident, and they liked it. Um, so they gave me a job, and I was like, oh, I have to drive to Cambridge every day. But it wasn't that bad because I worked out that because everyone's coming from Cambridge to London,
Yeah.
when I'm driving there, it's empty roads, right?
Yeah.
And it's all 70 miles per hour. So I'm like, I'll just either like drive there every day, or I'll just get an apartment over there because yeah, I'll just buy an apartment over there and I'll just come back in the weekends.
Yeah, that's an
And my dad's
interesting tactic of interviewing. Maybe people might listen to this. My mind might try taking that approach. But the thing I liked what you done though was the fact that and this is one thing I recommend to people to do as well. Just go for it. Like set yourself like go for interviews even before you might think you have a chance. Still go there, get the experience, and because
yeah,
your whole life isn't dependent on it. Like this is gonna be my big break. You'll be a lot more relaxed, and then
yeah,
you can kind of take that approach that you've done, where you've got more questions for them and find out all the stuff that you want to know about a job, and kind of have
yeah,
that more confident and relaxed approach. I think what people normally do is just look for that ideal job, wait for
yeah.
that, all the nerves build up, all the kind of like pressures build up. Whereas in your case, even if you didn't get it, you probably would have learned loads just from that experience, which would have prepared you better for the next one. Which is really,
Yeah,
really
like
good
I did a
approach.
test. I did a test. I had an interview. Like it was a good thing, and like I had a part-time job, so I was working at Debenhams back then. So I was like, I don't really need the money. Plus, I didn't even graduate. It was 6 months till I graduated. I knew I was gonna get a first because I was like we were hitting those targets. Like we had a group, there was three of us, and we called ourselves more than 90. So our aim was every single module
Nerds.
we hit more than 90, and I think the highest we got was 97 on a module, and um, we went back to the lecturer and we're like, "Can you increase this?" Um, he's like, "I don't give 100." So he came up with this rubbish idea about like how our design wasn't good enough. I'm like, our design is good. Like we can take it to a panel. Then he's like, look, man, we don't. I don't give 100. So so I'm like, okay, cool. I don't. I'm like, it's 3%. It doesn't make any difference. So so I think we averaged 80% at the end overall. So we were happy with it. We got our first. But yeah, I was like, even when I graduate, there's a bunch of graduate schemes. I could just jump on any of them.
You had a lot of
And
confidence, it sounded like,
yeah,
because you really like knew what you were doing and really enjoyed what you were doing as well.
basically, I think because I knew I in my final year, I started to understand programming like properly. Like before, it was more like I can make something do something.
Yeah.
Basically, I could get a app running, or I could get like something. So I could write a bunch of code and make it do something. But in my final year, I started to learn exactly how computers behave and the logic and everything behind it. And I could use that to manipulate computers into doing it how I wanted to do. So if someone said that it's not possible, I'm like, you just haven't tried it the right way. Um, yeah, there might be some scenarios where, like, let's say, uh, holograms or whatever. Like you're trying to build, like it's possible now, but there's like you can't just have. You need to have something reflecting it. Like there's like physical like
Yeah.
physics based there.
Yeah.
But with computers, you could just build whatever you want, right? It doesn't matter. It's up to your imagination. Yeah. So I was in a position where I didn't. It wasn't the end of the world. Plus, like I think one of the privileges that I had was even if I didn't have a job at the end, it wouldn't mean that I wouldn't be able to live, survive, or whatever. I know. There's a lot of people out there, especially in the minority community, where they they are the like last. They if they don't provide, no one else would provide for the family, and that's a very difficult position to be in because you have to put away your personal desires for like your family requirements, right?
No, definitely.
And like I wasn't in that position. My dad was still working, and like he was providing for the family, so I didn't feel a rush. And he even said to me like, you do whatever you want to do while I'm still covering for you, because you can take the risks. You can go unemployed, and it won't matter because you still have food at the end of the day. Um, and I think that also helped with the confidence a lot. Yeah, so I got that job. I decided to take it. A lot of my friends were like, "Oh, we should take a break and then start the job." I was like, "Nah." As soon as I did, because what I didn't want to do is lose my momentum from my studying to things. So I took like a couple of weeks break after my final exam, and I was starting the job. And I remember I didn't even get my results then. So I was a non-graduate person coding for this software company, providing for like millions of citizens across the UK. And yeah, just got there, started like building relationships with my colleagues. And I remember like it was my graduation time, and my CEO was like, "Oh, well, how comes you off tomorrow?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm graduating." He's like, "Oh, do you really need to go?" Like you're like, "I don't really care." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but I spent 3 years, so I might as well get the certificate."
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so after that, it was just like I think I spent my first year just learning, just learned everything. Had a really good line manager. He graduated the year before, so he was a graduate before. So like we got along. Even though he wasn't Muslim, he he's he understood my principles and stuff. So when I was like, I'm not coming to the pub or I'm not
Yeah,
going to thing, he respected all of that. But
that's
I
nice.
could easily see like that being a pivotal point where people just give in. They're like, oh, if I don't go to the pub, I'm not going to get that promotion. But that's not the case. Um, and I set myself when they were like, oh, do you drink and stuff? I'm like, no, very clear. There was there were other Muslims that came in to the company, and they drank and stuff. And I'm not gonna name names, but like it's very difficult to set your standards so high, then they come and lower it,
Yeah,
or
that's annoying. It's annoying. I hate that. Yeah.
yeah, or like they were there before you, and you go in, and suddenly you're this strict Muslim person who doesn't drink. Well, I think these days people understand it a bit more, but
A lot more, yeah.
like 7, 8 years ago, like you know how it is in the Silicon roundabout, like in Old Street, like we were at the heart of that. So we were in the tech hub, and it's all about drinking after work and making that connection, because you got all of these companies in that one building, and everyone it's all about networking, right? They'll have events after work, and these events will always include drinking. So where events were in the office and they had drinks, like I would just have my soft drink, but if it got too much, I would just leave. Like sometimes in the office they don't get drunk. So
Yeah.
it's very light drinking. But even then, it's just like not a comfortable environment.
Yeah, smells as
Uh,
well.
if it, it's disgusting. I went past a pub once and I was like, oh, this stinks, man.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't deal with it. Yeah, and I think I think what it is like if you don't set the right expectations, people will just feel like things. So like I know a lot of people don't go. Maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I know some people that don't go to Jummah because they feel like they can't tell their manager about their faith and that they need to go Jummah. I'm like very militant about it. I'm like from 12 o'clock to
I'm
2 o'clock.
going.
Don't disturb me. Even when I when I interviewed for GDS, I was like, I need extended break on a Friday, and I need time to pray. If you don't want to give me that time, then let's end the interview now. So I was like, then they're like, no, we are very respectful. Like you can have extended breaks. We have flexible working.
Jeez.
They're like, we have a prayer room in the office and whatnot. Yeah. Oh, anyways, I
Yeah.
forgot to tell you one thing. The
Go on.
company that I joined, that was in Cambridge. The day I joined, they moved to London. And I
Alhamdulillah.
called up, alhamdulillah, man. Like I called up the office manager. I was like, "Oh, is there a parking space for me when I come tomorrow?" He's like, "What do you mean? The parking space? We're in London." I'm like, "Oh, no one told me that." So yeah, London was in Old Street for like 4 or 5 years, 5 years, I think. It's very like I got to see how the tech uh,
Yeah. In the capital,
community works.
pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, very very into it. I was like Old Street. I've never heard of Old Street. I want to work in the city. I'm like, nah, Old Street's better. Yeah, you got
So
all this street food everywhere and everything. It's
yeah,
just
it's
amazing.
that nice kind of that vibe, isn't it? That kind of Shoreditch area is known as a tech hub. So that from that kind of first job, so which is meant to be in Cambridge, to end up being in London, alhamdulillah. How did you then go from there to GDS?
So, in that job, after like a year, I got promoted to mid-level. And you have to think like this is a private sector company, very small, so it's a very tight knit. It's like a family basically. So everyone gets along with each other. Everyone spends most of their life with each other. We'd play table tennis after work. We'd go out and have dinner after work. Those kind of things. We'd work long hours. So I worked really hard for years. So then after a year, I got promoted to mid level. After another year, they promoted me to manage their flagship product. So I did a few products for them and I gave them a few ideas, and basically one of them led to a lot of success, and that put my uh, profile up a lot in the company. And because I was one of the first developers, everyone knew me as we were growing and growing. So we went from like 15 people to about 80 by the time I left.
Proper startup
And
kind of culture, isn't it?
yeah, very, very much startup culture, but you're working a lot. In a startup, you're working a lot more than you think, but you're learning 10 times faster than you would anywhere else. Like GDS is very slow for me. Over there, it's like super fast. Like you want to do a thing, we discuss it. Next day, you're starting the work. GDS, you're discussing for weeks before you start the work.
If you're in another
And
department, bro, you'd be discussing for months and years. Trust me, I know that right now.
yeah. So like yeah, GDS is quite fast for government, but it's still slow compared to your private sector.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I learned so much. So I learned how to like code properly, learn Node.js. Node.js we were on 0.03, but I don't know if you know Node.js, but back then Node.js was so new. It wasn't even version 1. That's how new it was. And we started using it in our company because we had these really good developers who were always looking at the community, looking at what's new, looking at the new trends. And we started using it, and we were one of the first companies using that in production. And it was crazy. We shouldn't be using that in production. It wasn't stable enough. But we used it. Um, we improved it. We made it stable. Where we saw failures, we improved all of that. And when you're working with such a new technology, you're basically one of the first in that community. So everyone is helping each other. It's quite good. So yeah, so became they made me product development manager for one of the flagship product, and this was their main product basically. That they were selling for years, and that's where they were making most of the money. And then the opportunity came about. The CTO wanted to take a step back a little bit. So the opportunity came about where they needed someone to replace the CTO. But obviously, there wasn't anyone with those skills because he grew those skills for many years and he's very talented. So what happened was, so they approached me. They're like, what do you think about taking up his role? Or some of his role. He wants to take a little bit of step back. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And there was no, obviously, it's a private sector company. Like, there's no real process. The CEO decides
Just
what he
vibes.
decides. Just vibes, yeah. You get promoted on vibes, literally. You work the hardest, you get the most promotions and stuff. So I became the director of software development. And I was 23 years old. And this company was making millions. And I was like, what?
It's like a
What
fairy
did I
tale
sign
story,
up?
man. Like it's like a fairy tale story for a developer. Literally,
Yeah, it's a fairy tale
like a
story,
kid's book out of that.
but what I quickly realized is, yes, I was a good manager managing software development teams. I was good with the clients. I was good with all of that, but I didn't have have the skills to manage multiple teams. I didn't have those skills. Like managing your direct line reports, like 7, 8 people, whatever. It's easy, right? That's your team. You have a goal, and you do everything you want to do to achieve your goal. So the company sets goals, and you want to achieve those. So let's say we want to take software from X features, and we want to add YZ features. It's easy, like this, quite tangible goals, right? But when it comes to you're managing those managers, so under me there was like 4 or 5 managers, and those 4 or 5 managers were managing teams of like 4 or 5 people, right? And we had one team that was in New Zealand, one team that was in Belarus, and it was very difficult. I struggled first year probably. Struggled a lot. It was so much work. I had to come up with new systems of how people are working. My CEO was pushing me to keep improving things because he was like, "Look, it before the company worked because we were small, and it was very small. But now we got a development team of about 33 people. How do we make sure everyone is going towards the right goal, towards the same objectives and so on? Because each team what they were doing is each team had a product
Yeah.
to take care of. And what that meant is when we started doing things cross product, the managers weren't really working well together because all they cared about was their product, and they didn't care about like how the whole vision was. um, the vision of integrating everything in the whole high level vision. They didn't care about that because all they care about is the stability of their product. And I think what I had to do was break some of it up. So what I had to do was create a lot of disruption. I think people hated me at some point, but I was like, if we don't disrupt, we're not going to fix. Um, and it was more of a long term goal. Like what I then started to do was split some of these teams up into like smaller teams, have like specialists, um, allow people to move around so they learn different products. So, for example, if one team loses 2, 3 members, they're not stuck anymore. We can shift other developers from another team to support them while we rehire. And in the software industry, like unless you're paying ridiculously above the market salary, you're basically losing software developers 2, 3 every quarter, probably. So we're always hiring on a regular basis. So we just decided to just continuously hire. And when we continuously hire these people, we had to train them up on every single product. So they would do one quarter in one product, another quarter, and so on. And it was very difficult. We had to introduce proper sprint planning, proper use of Jira. It was
Hard work, man.
it's
Too
it's
much
a
going
lot.
on there.
Yeah, so much going
For a
on.
23-year-old.
Yeah, for a 23-year-old, it's too much going on. And I think people, I think because I was so young, I think one of the mistakes I made was telling him how old I am. Because I was so young, when I was managing 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds, they found it very difficult to accept my authority.
Yeah.
And when I told them, like, I think I had to set my expectations. I was like, they'll be like, oh, this is not the right way, blah blah blah. I'm like, you're just thinking about the smaller picture. Then I couldn't really just say stuff bluntly as well. I wanted to, but I couldn't. So what I had to do was get people on board, and you do that by getting people into like explaining your vision over and over again until people get it. Anyways, I think I talked about my career a lot. Then I think after a year and a half, it was just so draining. I was like, I want to get married, I want to have kids, I need to find a career that is more work-life balance friendly, basically. So what I ended up doing was um, we worked with GDS a few times. Went to a few, like a lot of our customers kept talking about GDS and gov.uk, and we're like, oh, they're good, but they're not like great because they were much. They simplified everything. So we had a product that was similar to what GDS was doing, and people were like, "Oh, we need to follow GDS standard." GDS standard. I'm like, "What is this standard?" Right? And I didn't really understand these standards properly. And when I started looking into it, I'm like, I really want to work for this place. Like they seem like they're not just following what bad practices that everyone else is following, but they're trying to change stuff. So I was like, yeah, I want to work here. And yeah, then I ended up applying for a job here.
How many years have you been in GDS now?
4 years, I think. So
Alright.
long time. Since 2017 or 16.
Yeah,
I remember.
I joined in
Yeah.
2019 and I met you.
Yeah. So yeah, when when I joined, there was only about a handful of Muslims there. We all knew each other. Yeah, it was quite a nice community. Then you came along.
I ruined it.
But yeah, it was when I joined GDS, it was completely different. And one of the key things I learned when I joined GDS is that when I went for the interview, it was so formal. I couldn't use all my tactics that I used in the private sector, where I just go in and be arrogant about what I've done, let my experience talk for itself. I had to prove that I had every single skill. So they went through every single skill that's required for my role, and they were like, "Show us evidence where you've done X, Y, Z."
Did you have
And
to
what
go
was
through
that?
those long 2-3 hour interviews or something like that?
Yeah. So it was a first interview was a test. So they give you a scenario, and you have to either code something or explain how something works. And it's like a whiteboard exercise kind of thing. And the second part of the test is interview is a question and answer interview. And in those question and answer interview, you're getting marked from like 1 to 7, and you have to basically prove that you have experience in each of the section. And that's something that I did not track throughout my whole career. So my whole career, when I did loads of stuff, went through loads of experience, but when you're in an interview, you don't think clearly enough. So you just think about the first example comes to your head, and that might not be the strongest example. That example might contradict another example that you might want to use, right? So when I went into the interview, I was like shocked. I was like, wow, I actually have to prove myself. So I still managed to somehow get in. But one of the things that they told me was my leadership skills weren't, I didn't have enough evidence of leadership skills. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Like, the last 3 years of my career has been leadership, like changing how teams work, changing management, changing structures, all of those things that leadership requires. But what I didn't do is I didn't have those answers at the time when I went to the interview. So when I got there, I was like a bit shocked about what they were asking. And that got me thinking, like, and I think that's when the first snippets of track progress came about. Like, I was like, okay, I need to start tracking what I do. So I started writing down everything I did in the last couple of years. So I categorized them based on like programming skills, leadership skills, communication, client management, and all of those kind of things. And so I was like, what are my achievements?
Yeah.
So
I want to get into that. I want to get into that because so you've been GDS for about 4 years, a bit more, and you've taken a career break recently as well, since July. So the last 6 months to focus on this. And I guess what I do want to ask, and probably going to get a bit deep. Cause I know you mentioned before, like, you tweeted about the imposter syndrome and stuff like that, and then, but also at the same time before in your career, like when you were starting out, you had a lot of that confidence, and which you kind of felt maybe led across to arrogance, stuff like that. So how did you, when it came to like the GDS interview, tracking the progress and realizing the leadership skills element that they sort of said you didn't have it, how did the feeling of imposter syndrome come about, especially like before, where you felt you had the confidence before and the arrogance, and then coming across this issue which led on to track progress? How did that all happen?
I think when I had that interview, I realized that I thought in my head that I wasn't good enough, and I blagged my way through my whole career. But in reality, I didn't blag my way through. I was working really hard. I had the right skill sets, and I had the right skills to do whatever I needed to do, right? But when you have those situations where you're like, you get something that you're not really expecting at all, I think you doubt yourself a lot. And like, my confidence level went down a little bit because I couldn't present myself in the way they wanted me. Even though I had the skills, I couldn't present those skills at the time, and that took my confidence away. And like, I felt like an imposter. I felt like, oh, maybe I wasn't really good enough for my role, or maybe I wasn't good enough to achieve what I needed to achieve. And it's one of those things that you have to understand the feeling. So when people go to interviews now, when I interview people and I see them getting nervous, I'm like, just relax, think about what you're doing, what you've done, and just explain it more clearly. And I try to give them as many hints as possible, like tell them, use the STAR method, use situation, task, action, result, and maybe reflection as well. Use that structure as much as you can, because when you talk in that structure, it's easier for us to mark. And the more open we are about the interview processes, it helps people with imposter syndrome and stuff like that. Because here you're not, when you're using the STAR method, you're not bragging. You're just telling someone a story, right?
Yeah.
It's not about a brag, oh, I'm an amazing developer, I've built all of these things. It's more about like, we had a situation where we had to do X, Y, Z, um, and this is what we did, and this is what the result was. And I think, yeah, like I think that helps a lot.
It sort of shows that you've done what you basically you've done it. You've got experience. You've got the portfolio, and you should be confident about it. Because interesting as well, and I deep in this a lot. I remember like just a few things. I remember when I was in GDS, one thing my line manager did, and probably my best line manager, shout out Daniel Sintim. He would he was like he can be very chilled and that, but he would make me write down what I was doing every month, and that kind of helped me when I was doing loads. I was like, early talent was like there's a lot of fires to put out, a lot of issues to deal with, and I kind of capturing all at the end of every month. I've not done it since he stopped becoming my line manager, and when I look back now, I kind of struggled to find stuff. But when I was doing it, and when I was writing out my competencies, when I was going for interviews, I thought, this is what I've done. I've done this. I've done that. Exactly. And not only did it give me the examples, but it gave me the belief that I have done this. Like I've put out this issue, these complicated, long-winded, complicated problems, which at the time, if you don't capture it, your mind just forgets it, because I think as humans, we're programmed just to care. We're like, we go on autopilot. We just, once you're putting out fires, if you're regularly doing that, then it's like, oh, this is my second nature. I don't really know if I've done this or not. And now, like, when I think about it from now a more of a early careers point of view, like, alhamdulillah for you, someone like said, you had some confidence, that you had that from the beginning. Now imagine someone that doesn't have confidence, someone that's like dreading the interview process, or dreading starting their job because they feel like they won't be good enough, they feel like they won't know what they're going to bring, or they might mess things up. And they're starting from like a level where there isn't even any confidence, and now they're going to go into a career path or into anything, and they're going to think, what have I done? Why am I even here? Do I deserve this opportunity over others? And I think it's really important that they are, especially at the beginning, like reassured that they do belong where they are. This is an opportunity for them to show their value. But one thing they could do that could really help them from the very, very beginning, even before they start, is start to track their progress and start to measure that. And I know you're working on a software to do that. So tell me about that software and how, to say I'm like kind of early to my career, how would I use that to my advantage?
Yeah, so what we do at Track Progress is we realize like there's a bunch of softwares out there that record accomplishments, stuff like that. And what I was thinking is like, what's the point of recording accomplishments if you can't prove your capabilities? Because those accomplishments might be, I ran a hackathon. But what are the skills that you gain from the hackathon that could be related to the role that you have? And so what we do at Track Progress is we get your career path. So your career path might be software engineer. And so we basically map every single role with every single career path with the roles that each career path has. So you might start off as an apprentice, then you go to a junior developer, then you go to a mid-level, then you go to senior, lead, head of development, whatever the career path is. And at each level, how do you know you've accomplished that level? So what we do is we help you to map your accomplishments, so things that you're doing against each of the levels. So for example, let's say you're an apprentice, and as an apprentice you need to do X, Y, Z. As you're documenting your evidence, you can tag them against the requirements that you have, the capability requirements. And when you go for your performance review or whatever, you don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to have the most shiniest thing. You don't need to have a software that you built that millions of people are using. You have each of the skills met. And what I found also is that sometimes you might be really good at one thing, but really bad at the other two. And what happens then is you go to your review, you go to your role, and you're basically blindsided because you think your manager's been praising you for the whole year. They're saying you how amazing you are. They've given you bonuses. They've given you references. They're giving you feedback, whatever. Been doing amazing. When you get to that performance review and they're like, yeah, I'll give you the highest mark for this section, but I have to give you a very low mark for the other two sections. And what that means is your overall mark isn't that high. So you're not getting that end of year bonus. Your performance is like partially met or whatever it is, and you're like, why didn't you tell me this throughout the year? You've been praising me, giving me a false sense of thing, and like a good manager will obviously like say, okay, look, you're doing really well in this section, but when it comes to performance review, you're going to be marked against all these other criteria, and you don't meet those criteria. I don't have much evidence. I haven't heard much about you doing those things. So can you start collecting some of that information? So a good manager will challenge you. A bad manager will be like, oh, you're amazing. We don't want to lose you. Just stay, just keep doing what you're doing. And at the end of the performance, at the end of the year, you're basically blindsided because you don't know what you need to do. Or you don't get that promotion that you wanted to do and get. So yeah, like what we're trying to do is make progression more objective, and as well as making progression more objective is that you know exactly what you need to do to get to that next level. You might not get lucky with the good manager. Like you said, Daniel was making sure you keep track of everything. But your next line manager didn't, right? But if you had the next line manager who didn't keep track of things and kept just saying you're amazing, and then when you went to your interview, you had none of the skills that you required. Is that manager really a good manager? Whereas Daniel would have been like, no, you're not really doing well in this section. I need you to go and show me some examples of this, or go work a bit more on this type of work. And maybe as a manager, they can even find you like opportunities where you can do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think even for managers, just understanding where your line reports are actually lacking is a very powerful thing. So you turn your line managers from becoming like this authority into becoming a career coach for you. They give you a career path. They give you advice on where you think. And if they see like you're specialized in a certain area, they could even recommend you to go to a role that just specializes in that area. So in the development community, we have like accessibility specialists. So if you're doing really well in accessibility, you can become an accessibility specialist where you can do what you're passionate about. You don't have to meet all these other criteria. But most other people, they like having a broader skills. So for them, that pathway is fine. But for you, especially if your line manager can see that everything that you're doing is for accessibility, you go to that pathway, and then you can excel in that pathway. You can be measured against that pathway rather than being measured in a generic way. Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Like, we're opening up the data of how your career is going. Like, you might.
No, go on, because then I'll ask a question, but I can ask it after.
Like, you might have done something that no one remembers, but everyone praised about, and you don't even remember. And I think that's one of the key things. Like, I remember doing loads of talks when I first joined GDS. I did, even though I know I should have kept track of it, I didn't keep track of it. I didn't collect feedback at the end, so I couldn't prove that those talks were good. And then it's only now when I'm reflecting that I remember that I'd done all those things. But if you asked me before this whole reflection session that we just had, how many times have you done public speaking? I'll be like, oh, it's only a handful of times, not many, because I don't remember all those things that I've done.
I'd say part of it is remembering, and part of it is also like remembering the experience of it. So I can be like, I remember when I was in my previous role in the diversity events, and I was dealing with like last second issues, and at the time it felt like, right now I feel like it was delivering at pace because I was doing this and that, but what I perhaps didn't capture as much was the resilience of it, where last minute there's a problem and now I'm feeling like this and I had to do this and I managed to overcome this burden, that burden. So it's like when you can not only capture the example, but the experience, where how it was, what you did, maybe what you felt, and how you overcame certain barriers. It can also kind of really like grasp that more as an experience example of just like a objective example. But then one thing I would ask as well was, so does it sort of rely on there have to be some sort of framework? I know when it comes to, let's say, in the government, you've got the DDAT, Digital Data Technology framework, career framework, and that's like one thing you could sort of use to sort of benchmark what level you're at. Is it sort of dependent on a framework, or like having some objectives, or can it kind of be in a way that doesn't always require that?
So we've thought about this quite a lot, and I know most places don't have a framework. Most private sector places, they don't have framework. They're just about like who they can see is doing the best work. And what we try to do is try to capture both. Like if you have a framework, we have a clear way of thing. But if you don't have a framework, we also have this generic thing that you can follow. Or if you just want to record your accomplishment, you can just do that. So if you just wanted to keep a log of what you're doing, it could just be like a week note for you. So you come in every week or every 2 weeks and you're like, okay, what have I done this week? What have I done outside of work? What have I done inside of work? What have I learned? How has it benefited the company? What's the impact that this thing that I did has had? I think one of the things that people don't measure is the impact. So you could say you built this amazing software that helps people. Let's say, for example, your podcast. You said I've done 10 podcasts, but if you don't understand the impact that it's had, you can't prove that those 10 podcasts are actually worth it, were good enough. So you could now say that these 10 podcasts have helped, let's say, 10,000 people gain better insights in successful apprenticeships. And I think that's one of the key things. Like those metrics actually matter.
And it kind of structures it so you can properly basically. And I think one thing that we as humans underestimate is structure. Because we might think, all I can do is I can capture it, but we never actually do unless there's a structure.
Yeah. Like if one of the things that we're trying to push people to do is structure their answers. So we're trying to build the system in a place where they structure the answer. So when we're asking about each experience, we're saying, okay, so what was the situation like? What was the scenario? My CEO came and asked me this thing. What did you have to do? So we're basically turning that STAR method into like a conversation, and then turning that conversation into a structured answer for you. So you can have the situation, task, action, result, and the reflection. So it'd be like, what did you learn from this? What could you have done better next time? And then as you're reflecting, you basically can improve next time. So rather than reflecting once a year, you're reflecting in incremental work. And one of the things we don't do is we just continue doing, like if one thing works, let's say my boss came and said, we've got a spreadsheet of 100 people with these attributes. I want it to display in a web page. on display all of these people in a web page, right? And if you're doing it one-off, like you might just transform that data into something readable for the website and just display it. But if let's say next week they come and say, "Oh, we've got another 100 people," so you're gonna have to do that manual task again. So in your reflection, you could be like, "Oh, maybe we could have automated it, and we could have made an integration from the spreadsheet straight to the website." So next time when your boss comes with a list of people, like, I'll just update the website spreadsheet, and you will update the website. So those kind of things is where the reflection comes in. As you're reflecting, if your boss comes next time, rather than spending time doing that whole manual process again, you could spend maybe an hour extra to automate that whole process, so you never have to do it again.
So you're learning and progressing. And one thing people don't do enough, I think, is think in a healthy way, reflect on what they've done. And what I sort of like about that as well is it doesn't have to be about sort of work or like the boss. It could be about, okay, if I'm outside of work, let's say I've not started a job yet, and now I'm a student at university or college, and I want to get some extracurricular activities. So now I'm going to do like work with a charity on some fundraising, or join a charity activity like doing a sponsored walk, or like delivering food packs. Even like stuff like that, if you're capturing, you can kind of think, what did I learn from this? What can I add on from this? Or what can I build for next time? And then it's kind of like a compound effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I imagine you start the compound effect from a much earlier age rather than starting when you're like a few years in your career where you've missed out on those early things they've done.
Yeah.
And the value of doing things the first time as well. Like you never forget that. Like, for example, right now I can podcast very easily. Like this that I can set it up. When the first time I was doing it, like my sort of brain wasn't wired to it. Like I had to like really think about, okay, how am I going to set this camera up? How am I going to set the screen up? How am I going to set this up? All these little things that if I tried to capture it now, it wouldn't matter to me because I wasn't really going through it. I wasn't really deep in it. But if I do it at the beginning, where I'm really deep in it, where it's all new to me and I'm capturing it right now, how I'm feeling, what I'm learning, and you're learning a lot more because it's new, then like I can imagine the compound of it being way greater. So if somebody's listening to this and thinking, how can I use this? Then, really thinking about, okay, so I've not got any real experience here, but I can do this voluntary activity. Let me start capturing this. And then maybe I start breaking it down to different skills, leadership, working together, those sort of things. And then we look at what am I learning from it, what can I add on, where are my gaps, and starting to do that. Because I personally, if you can build that awareness up as well of where you are, then you're going to set yourself up for a long-term career success. Like, it's a no-brainer, but I think it's just one of the things nobody will be told to do, especially before you even start.
Yeah, it's that gap analysis where there's a gap in your knowledge, and you need to understand where that is. And I think when you're early in your career, people are more forgiving about mistakes that you make. Like, for example, if someone made a mistake at the as a apprentice or a junior, it's easier to forgive them. But like at a senior level, you make that same mistake, that you're not gonna get forgiven. Like they're gonna hold you accountable for it. You're gonna have to answer for that mistake. Whereas when you're a junior, you can make those mistakes, and if you don't reflect on your mistakes, you're never gonna learn. So let's say someone's made a mistake. They've done something, like they've deleted a deleted a database. Yeah. If they don't reflect on that mistake, they're basically always going to be scared to delete a database, or or make that same mistake, or like even go near a database. If they made a reflection, like, I need to learn more. Maybe I should have done this. I should have done that, and that would help them a lot, I think. Yeah.
It's interesting because I remember I've done a post recently with Moti, and he mentioned mistakes and how he's like learned from his journey of becoming like a motivational public speaker, and still on that journey, but how he's learned from making mistakes from the beginning, and the fact that especially if you're, and then I think in the case of the podcast, the majority of listeners will be at an earlier stage, you've got that privilege to make those mistakes. And if you're combining it with tracking your progress, then you'll become more fearless in the long run. Because now I've learned from this, I failed fast, I've done this, I've picked it up from this mistake, I've learned, I've improved, I've gone a step up, same, so forth, and so on. And now, at the same time, whilst I'm doing that, I'm tracking it. So, okay, my leadership skills weren't great here, I made a mistake here, what can I learn from it, what can I do next time? And then whilst you're going up the steps, you're tracking it, you're building experience up. And then, I think that's why I like really wanted to do this episode, because it fits in very well. And I think from a young Muslim perspective as well, like even them as themselves and into a workplace which is predominantly non-Muslim, they really feel at a disadvantage. They really feel like, okay, I have to prove myself even more, or am I even going to belong here as a thing? But then if you're, again, like we mentioned, embracing the mistakes and also tracking your progress, and you've got that recorded and you've got it there, then nobody can really, you're going to feel confident about it because you've got it there, right? Like nobody's going to say you've not done this when you've got it clearly listed and stated.
I think one of the things that people need to be aware of is that if you don't track what you're doing, you're vulnerable to people putting you down. So let's say you have a really bad line manager, and you don't really get along with them, and when it comes to performance review, they're always marking you down because you can't back yourself up at that point. If you had all of this stuff written down, all you need to do is have a look at where you've done X, Y, Z and just present it back to them. And if they say, no, it's not good enough, present another one until you can show that you have that skill. And this is, people think that there's a lot of subjective things in performance reviews. It looks like it's objective, but it's not. It's very subjective. It's about who's actually reviewing you. That person, I remember we have this thing called corporate contribution in GDS.
Yeah.
I remember, me, you, and a few Arfa and a few others, Ash and Mahmoud, all of us, we do a lot for the community, and we give up a lot of time to make sure things happen right. And one of my line managers really understood the impact having a minority community startup, especially a Muslim community where people are not very comfortable talking about the topic and whatnot. Like starting up a community like that and maintaining it and making sure we throw events, like we did the Hajj Tech event, we did we got Muzmatch to come down, talk about software, how they started their company. Fastaphone, the one you done, that was great. Like we got so many people fasting with us, like so many people that I've never spoken to because of Fastaphone. What else did we do? We did
Ashraf's events are really good.
Yeah. Oh, Eid party. That was amazing. The Eid party was amazing. Everyone loved it. And I think that these kind of impacts that we have, like putting the Muslims on the map, has had tremendous effects. So, for example, now we've done a lot of lobbying with the people estates and stuff to get a bigger prayer room. And guess what's happened? Recently, our COO got in touch with us and said when they redesigned the prayer room, it's much bigger now. And there's a curtain in the middle, so if people want to do meditation or they want to just come in and just relax, they can do that. And if female sisters, they want to have a separate space where they're more comfortable, like practicing their faith or just having just a time for reflection, people can do that. And it's now become multi-use rather than where it was currently, where only 3-4 people can fit in there, and we get stuck when it's winter time.
Man comes, he's stuck.
Yeah, and then I know some people don't like praying when there's others, so they would go in there and they wouldn't want anyone else to come in, and it's just awkward. So now, like,
I
and
remember those moments. Or
they've
they're
also
praying and
made
guy comes and meditates. Okay.
the biggest achievement is um, they're also making plans to get a wudu facility in there.
Is it the Wudu Master
And
3000?
no, I don't think it's I think it's just a basin. But imagine how much time we save. Like when you're in between meetings and you're running around and you're trying to like quickly pray your Asr Salah before Maghrib, and you don't have wudu. You have to go all the way downstairs. That's like a 20-minute journey. But now people can do wudu. We think they can pray. It's just changed everything for us. And I think this is why I love GDS, because they've taken what we've told them. And this wouldn't be possible without us building this network. And back to my point, like I had a line manager who didn't really understand the impact of that. And they were trying really hard to understand. But because I'm not sure, like because maybe they're in a privileged position, they cannot see how much impact this makes on a day-to-day thing of a Muslim. And I think measuring that impact is very important. Like you need to articulate your impact clearly to people.
Yeah. Would you say then, like, track progress not only can it sort of help you, let's say, so in your case, being like, or let's say you've been an apprentice developer and having the framework there ready, and we're working towards, but not only that, but also being somebody that's not so experienced and wants to start building up the experience, start capturing that, what they're learning, and building
Yeah.
up those soft skills, leadership skills, stuff like that. But also, like, would you go further on to say, like, even if you're like a network or a community, would you be able to, and you've got like set goals or objectives that you want to do, could a community start measuring their progress and tracking their impact as well with this?
In theory, we're trying to keep it as open as possible. So, what we're trying to do is allow people to build paths or use a predefined path. So, if you're a community and you want to see how well you're doing, you might be like, okay, we're a level 1 community when we have X amount of viewers and X amount of engagement, and X amount of events. To go to the next level, we're looking at expanding the community from like a 50 people community to a 100 people community. So those kind of things you say, like what we're trying to do is allow people to build their path. It could be career, like it could be like you're a new dad and you want a dad progress career. So I'm a new dad. So I've got a 1-year-old now, and when I first, I was like, what do I need to do? So one of the things might be like learn how to. Your level 1 might be learn how to change nappy or feed the baby.
Take nappy out of the thing.
Yeah, so like we want to keep it as open as possible. Let people create frameworks, and eventually, maybe potentially also create this community sharing concept where people can share the frameworks. They can publish their frameworks, and other people can choose to follow these frameworks and path of thing. We have loads of ideas, but we want to keep it simple. So when we're our first version, it will be just following a specific career path. Then we'll allow like just recording accomplishments. It might be the other way around, but we're thinking about how to keep it as simple as possible. Record your accomplishments, just so you remember what you're doing.
Yeah.
Then we add more complex stuff like following a pathway and maybe creating your own framework. But our goal is to help people track how they're doing, and our main focus is around careers basically. But you can basically use it for anything.
No, definitely, that'd be really interesting. Tracking your own growth, that'd be pretty cool. And even if you're like an apprentice and you've got all these objectives as part of your qualification, be able to track how you're getting along with that and make sure you're meeting those requirements. It sounds like there's a lot of potential there for it to be very flexible and open up whole world of opportunities. So it's nice to listen to this now. I'm thinking, okay, you've mentioned all this great stuff. When do I get to see it, or how do I get to sort of try it or find out updates about it so I can maybe start using it myself. Because now I'm thinking this guy, me, the post has gassed it all up, and it's like made me really think about tracking it now. How do I go about doing it? Because everyone likes to see things and the practical elements. So
Yeah.
how are things with that? So when would somebody be able to sort of get an update or take a look at it?
So we have a waiting list that we will be starting up soon. So you can sign up to be part of our beta program. But in the next 4 to 6 months, we should have a beta product out there. So the people that have signed up, they'll get early access, and they'll be helping us improve the product. It'll be a free product for everyone to use, and it'll be something that we are working closely with the beta users to make sure that we get the right sort of things in there, the right user experience, because we don't want it to be like another burden. We want it to be like easy. Like, for example, integrate in let's say GitHub, the code repository. So when someone makes a change or someone we can be like, oh, we've seen that you made this change. What skill could you relate this to, and what does this do, and so on. So we can automate a lot of these things. It might even be like integrating with the calendar, like looking at things like this meeting that you had. What skills have you gained from this? What things? So you don't have to do all of it. You can ignore most of it, but really trying to automate this whole collection process. And yeah, this data collection, like eventually we might be in a position where we could be like, there's this free course to improve this skill. So for example, there's loads of free courses out there. So if we see that you're lacking in a certain area, we could send you a nudge, like, it doesn't seem like you got much skill in accessibility or public speaking. There's a course here that could teach you some of this stuff. So this course will give you like more like backing to say, oh, you know this thing because you've done the course. You've got a certificate to prove that you've done that course. There could be also opportunities to find mentors. So one of the things early on we wanted to do was, where you lack, let's say, a skill in public speaking, we could potentially like connect to your LinkedIn and scan your network and say, these are the people who have done the most public speaking, and these are the people you should contact. So here's a list. Contact whoever you want to contact and get in touch with them. And it also starts this connection of like mentoring your progression doesn't need to be like what you know and what your network knows. It could be like who you can connect to. And yeah, these are all ideas that we want to get to, but the main idea is to help people track how they're doing in their career, get where they are. And our website will be trackprogress.io. And we're on Twitter at track_progress. So just tweet us whenever, and one of our team members will get back to you, basically.
Yeah, and I'll try to, I should be able to actually post a link in the comments of the YouTube video for the beta list. And I think it could be those that aren't in a particular job or that are sort of starting out as well. This could definitely be like very, 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 very valuable for them, and even giving the feedback and helping develop a software where you might not be a tech person could also be quite a cool thing to have as part of like your accomplishments and like your own sort of experience and progress. So why not get involved? This is an opportunity, and inshallah soon this will also be a way to help you progress and go far in your career. And a key element of that again is tracking and capturing what you've done, your accomplishments, and then learning from each one and building up. So this, I think this can definitely be a super valuable resource. Yeah. I don't have much else to add. As you do.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think one of the key things I've seen in the pandemic is that people are changing careers. So they're going from, let's say, for example, accountancy to software engineering, or software engineering to business management, or whatever.
Transferable skills, you're gone.
Transferable skills is one of the... Everyone is scared to change the career because they don't know what skills they need to do this thing. Because anytime I talk to someone, let's say, for example, someone wants to do software engineering, I'm like, I have loads of people come to me, like, I want to do it, can you teach me? I'm like, what do you know already? I'm like, do these tutorials and then come back to me. But what would be really useful is if someone could take the skills that they have, see what skills you need as a software engineer, and map those skills against that record, and then you can see where you're lacking. So you're not starting at 0, you're starting at maybe like level 1 or 2. So you might have loads of leadership skills, loads of client experience, loads of understanding software. You might be a software salesperson turned into a software developer, or a software developer turned into sales. So you can see what skills you can transfer from one job to another. I know a lot of front-end developers who turned into designers. So when they turn into designers, because front-end works quite closely with design, a lot of people with front-end skills have very good eye for design. So they make really good designers or web designers, whatever you want to call them. So when you want to move from front-end development to design, how do you do that? And similarly, from a lot of like web designers, they have coding skills. They know how to code JavaScript, they know how to code HTML, because they had to build interfaces to prove their concept. So how do you go from there to there? And these are the skills. What we don't realize is most careers overlap skills. Most careers, communication skills, leadership skills, even problem-solving skills, they're all transferable skills. Like, let's say, for example, you're a plumber. You're solving problems all the time. What are you doing as a software developer when you're looking for a bug? You're trying to identify where the bug is, what's causing the bug. So, like, how you would find the leak, what's causing the leak, process of elimination. You do the same thing when you're doing the software engine, when you're debugging a piece of code. And it's as simple as that. And I think most people get freaked out when they see coding. It's just syntax. Like it's just like another language that you have to learn. And once you learn the qualities of the logic of the language, you can basically do whatever you want to do.
And Google the solutions.
Google the solution. If you, yeah, that's a very good skill actually. If you don't know how to Google, you're probably gonna suck at being a software engineer. Like most problems that you have, even like me right now, even if I know the answer, I'll still Google it just to confirm. Like I know what. It's not about Googling; it's about knowing how to Google. Like you need to ask the right questions, and those questions basically give you the answer. Like for example, you had this issue with your podcast thing before the call, right?
Yeah.
What did you do? You Googled, but you knew what to Google. If you were like, oh, issue with podcast software, if you just wrote that, which some people would, you would get millions of records, but you knew aspect ratio issue with OBS, whatever it's called, OBS software, and probably like 100 more people had the same issue. Someone's posted a solution, you found the solution. Yeah, and you did. Yeah,
that's why Google has that name in it, Sheikh Google.
Sheikh Google, yeah.
Well, of course, we don't rely solely for Islamic knowledge. Just a caveat there, just to put that out there. Don't use it as your source of Islam. Yeah. Islam's a lot more broad, and you need probably a real teacher for that. That's a real life kind of. Everything else, you can probably Google.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, anyways, that's what I want to talk about. Like, track everything that everyone does. Like, don't feel like you're bragging about the work that you're doing. When you're sharing it with your manager, share it with your manager, share it with your mentor, share what you're doing. Don't brag. It's not about bragging. It's about showing them what you've done and how what you need to do, basically. And yeah, like even before our software launches, just open a Google Doc and keep a track of week 1 or like so week beginning September 20th or whatever. And in that week, just at the end of the week on a Friday evening when you're tired and you can't be bothered to do any work, which most people are, and you're just zoning out, waiting for that 5:30 bell to ring. Just take half an hour, just write down everything that you've done that week. You could just put bullet points at the beginning, then afterwards come in and add reflections, however you want to do it. Just keep track of everything that you're doing, because I promise you, in a month or 2 months' time, you won't remember that small detail that you've done.
The biggest lie we tell ourselves is we're gonna remember.
Yeah,
and do it.
We're never gonna.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I remember. Then no, never ever happens. But when I capture it, you thank yourself in the future, basically, and you've resolved a lot of future pain points. Definitely.
I think one of the things is also noticing a pattern. If you start noticing that you're always doing certain pieces of work, those patterns can help you either dictate your career path or show you that you're not really as good as the role that you think you are, because you haven't done all the other things. And celebrate your accomplishments as well. Do talks about a problem that you solved. I think when you do that, you're also like promoting yourself. So, for example, what I used to do was any big problem that I used to solve, I would have a show and tell. So we have show and tells in GDS quite a lot. So in those show and tells, do a small presentation, lightning talk, 5 minutes. You go on there, explain the problem, explain what you've done, explain thing, and what that does is raises your profile within that organization or in that community, whatever, because you're seen as a person who understands that specific area. You're becoming like a specialist. So so when someone has similar problems, they come to you, and this helps you also improve your knowledge, make your knowledge stronger, because now you're actually teaching someone. And secondly, you get loads of indirect feedback to your line manager. So one of the things, because I try to do a lot of these talks, I used to try to, I used to get feedback sent to my line manager without even my knowledge. And when the performance review used to come, like, oh, someone sent you some feedback about this, and then you're on a good level with the line manager, because your line manager has more like, oh, it's not just me who thinks this person is good. Other people think they're good as well. So when I have to prove, when I give him like exceeded or whatever high performing mark, other people are not gonna question it, because they know how well this person is doing.
Yeah,
I was
gonna say, I think it also counteracts the whole thing about what was it? I can't remember the word now. But when people kind of select who they like and only give them promotions, if you've got a way to objectively track what you've done, then like you mentioned, it won't be subjective. It won't be based on interpretation or I think you've done well. Whereas next guy, Joe Blogs, done jack and he gets a promotion on top of you. But if you've got your portfolio, your evidence, your examples there, and you've got a case, then you can kind of use that as a counter tactic and be like, look, this is what I've done. Did I have more than that? If so, prove it. So there's a lot of value. I think you got me thinking a lot more also just about how I can get back to the community that listen to this, especially that those that are kind of like before their career in beginning it, how they can start to think of it. Because I'm looking at some work to do more with the listeners, and I think there's definitely some ideas you sprung to mind. We could talk about later as well.
And I think it also helps with imposter syndrome. Like we as Muslims are like taught to be humble about what our accomplishments, but humbleness does not help you in your career. What it does, it actually like holds you back, because you're not talking about what you've done, and it's not about not being humble. It's about actually telling people like, this is what I am capable of. And I think telling people and showing people is two different things. Like you can say I'm great, but if you can show people that you're great as well by putting up these presentations, like people would change the perspective of like Muslims in general. Like if they see more Muslims presenting, they feel like Muslims as general like very high achieving people. So it's a form of dawah for everyone. And for you as well, like it beats your imposter syndrome because you're not like, oh, I think I'm great or I'm not good enough. This document here or these pieces of work I've done shows that I'm actually doing what I'm meant to be doing, and it tackles imposter syndrome quite a lot. There's still a lot more other symptoms to tackle, but at least you're not questioning yourself if you have the capability.
And I think in a professional setting as well, especially, I think this works really, really well. And I think the difference between being confident and being arrogance when you start exaggerating everything, saying I'm great, I'm amazing, I did this and this, that. Whereas I think the confidence part is more of, this is what I did, this is what I achieved, this is how I did it. And you can acknowledge your skills. And it's saying I'm good at this, I'm great at this. If you actually are, because you've got the evidence to back it up. If you're making it up and kind of really stretching it and lying, then you're kind of like, and really kind of thinking more of yourself and being, I guess, full of yourself in a way, then I guess you're kind of extending onto the arrogant side. Whereas if you're keeping it real, keeping it honest, and you're showing what you've actually done, and the impact you've really had, then I think it's definitely something that shouldn't be undercut, especially in a professional setting. I mean, you don't want to tell your wife, show and tell, like, I've been a great husband. They might be like, what?
I'm a great husband.
I did this and that. Yeah, you might get a kick out of the house, but in a professional setting, 100%.
Yeah. I think one of the things is when you're a junior, when you're a apprentice, like you feel like you have to exaggerate to actually feel like you're good enough, because you got all these amazing senior developers who are doing amazing things all the time and all this shiny stuff. Like, I wish I could do it. And you start exaggerating your abilities, and I think when you start doing that, you're making yourself vulnerable to be questioned, and you don't want to be in that position. What you want to show is that at this level, I should be working at this working thing. I should be working at this level, doing this thing. I've actually exceeded in certain areas, but I am meeting all the criteria that are needed for this role. So I am actually meeting the entry level for the next role. And that's how you want to present yourself, rather than being arrogant about, I'm the best because I've done this one piece of software.
Bro, I think it's been an interesting episode because I think we've heard a lot about your journey, and especially as someone who's seen you. So in summary, you kind of gone from like a very kind of interesting approach to how you started your career, like from being a sort of developer from like the age of 10, 11, trying to fix stuff, from going to like college, university, doing really well, and then even approaching an interview in a much different way than somebody would in the mainstream, and then kind of going into a startup environment, and from a startup environment going into like a whole government technology environment, and then from there taking a career break and then looking at this kind of element of tracking progress and how you can use software to solve the solution. I know you've done a lot of other interesting stuff in terms of like for like the Muslim community as well. I can't remember which one it was. Was it the one about meals or something to do with during the pandemic?
Oh, we did share iftar, so we fed about 1,400 meals. Yeah.
So yeah. I think there was a very good person to follow. Are you on LinkedIn or are you just on Twitter?
LinkedIn, Twitter. Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, both. So just type in Dilwoar Hussain. I'll give you my links. And just reach out to me if you want to chat. I'm happy to chat about anything. No, especially about progression, how to choose the right path, like something that I'm passionate about.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think again, like, if anything, it's one lesson to take or one thing to take from this podcast episode. Really think about where am I now and how am I even capturing or tracking my progress? Because if you start doing this now, your application process will become easier, your interview experience will become easier, your career development will become easier, and you'll be saving yourself a lot of pain. And I've spoken to many people, and I'm sure you have as well, when it comes to lacking confidence in interviews and stuff like that, because they don't feel they have the examples, but they actually do. It's just they didn't ever capture it, they didn't ever track it, and as a result now they're feeling the pain that they would have resolved if they took a proactive approach. And so once this software's up and running, a lot of our community members can use it as well and help themselves in their career.
Definitely.
Because we want to see young Muslims excel, and if we start this journey right at the beginning, then that growth can definitely compound and go far, inshallah. But with that, bro, I just want to say assalamu alaikum, and it was great having you on, Jazakallah khairan for joining.
Well, walaikum salam, jazakallah for having me. Yeah, I've enjoyed talking to you. Hopefully you edit it properly and you don't make me look bad. But
can't make promises there.
Yeah, I'll send all the links. There's a few good blog posts about this thing. I think there's a blog post about by Julia Evans, and it's called Bragg Documents. So just type in Julia Evans Bragg Documents in Google, and you'll see like this is where this whole concept of thing came about, track progress. So yeah.
Sounds good.
With that, thank you very much.
Yeah, inshallah. With that, we'll close. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.